Well, like so many Americans, my family and my friends face mental health challenges. And so, I think there's very few families and very few workplaces or communities that can't say that. And I think one of the things that I've seen is even as we've made advances in the ability to treat mental health, the actual delivery of that treatment, the affordability and the accessibility has often lagged behind. And so one of the things I've been really focused on is trying to make sure that insurers, that providers are actually delivering on mental health care. When I moved to Orange County 10 years ago, there were no pediatric mental health beds in the entire county. And as I say that, you might think, well, it's just a county. Orange County is bigger than like 20 some states. And yet we had no pediatric mental health beds. And so although that's changed with the leadership of our children's hospital over time, it really goes to show you how difficult it is to be able to find mental health care as well as afford it. And so when I talk about people being healthy, I mean healthy in every aspect of their lives, both physical and mental health. Well, talking to different people about their experiences, one of the great things about being a congressperson is people share their life stories with you. They share their frustrations with you. And I think one of the amazing things that we've seen the disability community do over my lifetime, I was born in the era of the ADA. I grew up in Iowa. Tom Harkin was my senator. I can remember what it was a big deal it was to have the ADA pass, as we've seen the stigma reduced. And more people feel like they can talk about their frustrations and their challenges, and what they could accomplish, what they could get in terms of wellness, and what they often are falling short on. And so, I started talking to different people. I started looking at things, talking to psychiatrists in our community, psychologists, social workers, schools, teachers, and hearing about their challenges. And so I think that's really part of being a representative, is that learning part. Learning what the problems are in your community and then teaching other people about them to create that momentum to fix them. There are real lessons to be drawn from the successes of the ADA, from the successes of the advocacy that the disability community and those who support the disability community have done, which is that allowing every American, regardless of their different abilities, to achieve their potential is a great thing for our economy. In fact, when we design inclusive things, not only do we create opportunity for people with disabilities to contribute to our economy, to contribute their talents and their passions to our society, but often designing things from an inclusive perspective creates a better outcome for everybody. And so I heard a lot about this exact thing when I chaired my hearing this fall on the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee on Natural Resources. I was really interested in the topic of the accessibility of public lands. And I mean that accessibility in a lot of different ways, including the costs of getting there, the transportation issues, where we locate these public lands in terms of environmental justice, but I also meant very particularly the accessibility for the disability community. And here's what I learned. Good trail design that helps people with physical disabilities is also the right kind of trail design to prevent erosion and ensure conservation. And so in addition to making these trails more accessible for people who, for example, may use wheelchairs, may use different kinds of walking assistance or mobility assistance, you also make those trails easier for people who use strollers and have kids, for people who are seniors who may have balance challenges. And so the result is more people in our national parks, more people on our public lands. And that is good both for our souls, for our spirits, but also for our economy and those rural communities around the public land. So I think it's just a false idea that sometimes gets pushed out by corporations or by the business community that accommodating every American to the extent possible is somehow a burden or an expense. To the contrary, it is a benefit. And it is a privilege that we are able in our country to welcome everybody into these institutions and organizations. As a mom a single mom of 3 kids who is by myself when I have little kids and trying to navigate, a lot of the things that people may think of in a strict legal sense as sort of accommodations for the disability community also made those trails and those experiences possible for me. So a great example here is designing picnic tables that accommodate wheelchairs. Those same picnic tables also accommodate high chairs and accommodate people who need different kinds of seating and different kinds of support when they seat. So I think there's a lot of inclusive design principle that we ought to be bringing to everything, and recognizing too that the disability community and people with disabilities, it's not just one kind of disability, and the kinds of technological assistance and what's possible for people is going to change over time. So the more inclusive we can be in those design principles, we're often going to be better at achieving our goals and set ourselves up for the future, which I hope will continue to see more options and more possibilities for people with disabilities to fully participate. One of the things we've seen is, for example, with housing for our military. My teacher, Senator Warren, was pushing to make sure that we're building more military housing that can accommodate people with disabilities. But if we were to design these houses with a visitability lens, like you said, we would build them all that way. And that means as the population of people with disabilities goes up and down, we don't run into these shortages and these blockages because we've designed it so that it's appropriate for everybody right from the start. Orange County, California, really boomed in sort of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and a lot of those folks now are aging. So in the district that I represent, California's 45th district, we have an aging population. We're also home to the second largest retirement community in the United States, Laguna Woods. Many of us at different points in our life will benefit from different kinds of accommodations. And so that's why I said I think about accommodating disabilities not as something that we do just for people with disabilities, but as something we do for all of us. We all benefit from having people with disabilities be in and among places, and we also all benefit from those universal design principles, often at different points in our lives. People with disabilities often face special healthcare needs, but what they get from the healthcare system is distinctly unfair treatment. And we see this in a lot of different ways. Everything from denials of organ transplants to very, very difficult, arduous arguments about what is and is not medically necessary for people with disabilities. So I've been working across the aisle to address some of these issues, and I'm really grateful for the disability community in helping me understand these challenges and raise them. So for example, with my colleague, Jamie Herrera Butler, a representative, a Republican from Washington, we have introduced the Charlotte Woodward Organ Transplant Discrimination Prevention Act. And it would end blatant discrimination in organ donation against people with disabilities, which is often based on perceived years of life, years of quality life in ways that are really unfair to people with disabilities. We've also been working on making sure that we preserve the tax deduction for extraordinary medical expenses. That is a big issue. People with disabilities, particularly if they're facing any kind of surgery or procedure, to continue to treat their disability throughout their lifetime, making sure that we preserve that tax deduction. And then also looking at what insurers are doing. And for me, this started with a real interest in mental health parity, the promise that insurers would treat mental health and physical health the same. They do not. They break that promise year after year. So I've passed a bill to help crack down on insurers, and that got me interested in how insurers define medical necessity. And the way that they do this with regard to things like wheelchairs, assistive devices, prostheses is really, really problematic. And so it's often very, very biased against the disability community and prevents them from being as healthy as they could be. I've written to the Biden administration and asked them to issue better guidance to insurance companies on what they mean by medical necessity and to police insurers more. We should not be putting it on patients, on consumers, to be able to go to battle with these huge insurance companies with big insurance. That is the job of the government to fairly enforce the law and to look behind what may seem like innocuous definitions of medical necessity and see how in real life they are discriminating against people with disabilities. Yeah, look, healthy air, clean water, being able to be healthy in your environment is something that's important for all Americans, but it is particularly important for people who may be struggling with lung disease, maybe have more difficult to treat conditions. And so I think this is an issue about equity, it's an issue about justice, and we know that certain communities as well, lower income communities, communities of color, have long been the repository of pollution. And so I think it's important that we begin that transition to green energy, that we see it as something that we're doing both for our health, for our planet, but also for our economic competitiveness. Many of our competitor countries, including China, are investing much more in green energy than we are. And part of the reason they're doing that is they understand that the economy that has the manufacturing jobs for the next century will be the country that figures out how to manufacture in a clean way. And it's the same thing in terms of thinking about housing shortage, which is a big issue here in California. How can we build more housing? Part of that is thinking about how can we build housing in a very green way that minimizes the harms on the environment, that lets us put more dense housing without harming our environment. I think one of the things that's really, really important as an elected official is to be honest with the American people. And that means really pushing some of these fossil fuel companies to push against what we call greenwashing, which is, when they say that they're all about clean energy transition, and yet they continue behind the scenes to spend millions and millions of dollars lobbying against clean energy initiatives. So I think it's really important not just to ask, do you support clean energy? Do you like polar bears? Everybody's going to say yes. But really to say, what action will you take to put behind your words? So, if I had asked, when you think back to the conversation I had with the CDC director about free COVID testing, if I had asked him, do you think that anyone should not get a COVID test because they're worried about the expense? He would have said, oh, of course not. I think everybody should get a COVID test who needs one. But that doesn't mean that everyone will be able to get one. And so you really have to push toward what is the action that you're going to be able to connect this to. So if you're testifying before me and you're saying that you believe climate change is real and you think it's an existential threat, I need to hear, the American people need to hear, the people of this world need to hear, what are you doing? What are you doing to reduce emissions? What are you doing to change your business model? What are you doing to make a difference? And it needs to be meaningful and real. It can't be empty words.